They had padlocked the fridge in her own house, the very house she had built with her own hands, the one where she raised her 3 children who were now slowly killing her, but without touching her. It all began one chilly morning in Phoenix, Arizona. Miss Carol woke up to a noise coming from the kitchen. It was early. It wasn't even fully daylight yet, but the dishes were already rattling, and the smell of freshly cooked oatmeal made her stomach rumble. She sat on the edge of the bed, put on the cotton robe that was over 15 years old, and slowly walked toward the kitchen. Her heels ached, but her heart ached more because her children had been acting strange for days. When she arrived, she stood still. What she saw crushed her soul. The table was full of food: bagels, warm toast, bacon, scrambled eggs, fresh cheese, and coffee. Stephen, the eldest, was already eating in a hurry. Grace was talking on her cell phone with someone, and Tony, the youngest, was reviewing some papers. But no one looked up at her. "You didn't make any for me?" Carol asked in a quiet voice, not wanting to bother them. Grace clicked her tongue and answered without looking at her. "Well, we didn't know if you were going to wake up. Sometimes you get up late." "And there's never enough," Tony added without lifting his head. Carol swallowed hard. She took a step toward the refrigerator to make herself something, even just one egg. But when she grabbed the handle, something stopped her. A metallic click, a cold resistance. It was a padlock. They had put a padlock on the fridge, in her house, in her kitchen, on her refrigerator. "What is this?" she said in a low, almost trembling voice. Stephen let out a sigh of annoyance. "It's for precaution, Mom. You forget to close things properly. We've had a few things spoil because of you, and also because we can't afford all the extra expense," Grace added. Miss Carol didn't answer. She lowered her gaze. She pressed her lips together. And with tears in her eyes, she went straight to the pantry. She only found a piece of old bread roll, hard as a rock, and half a packet of instant coffee. She sat in the rocking chair on the back porch, and while chewing that bread as if it were cardboard, she thought, "When did my children stop loving me?" What she didn't know was that that day was going to change everything, because hidden in that house, among old documents and buried memories, there was something that her late husband Frank had left in writing, a paper that would reveal the truth and destroy everything her children were secretly planning. Now, allow me a moment before continuing. If this story is already touching your heart, we ask you a very special favor. This channel has a goal: to reach 150,000 subscribers before the year ends, and to achieve it, we need a lot of your help. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and like this video. We will be very grateful to you. And tell me in the comments, what country and city are you listening to us from? Now, let's get back to Miss Carol, because that same morning, while they were humiliating her, she was going to begin remembering things she had been trying to forget for years. Just as she got up from the rocking chair on the porch, Miss Carol heard the front door open abruptly. She didn't need to turn around to know it was Stephen. He always arrived the same way. As if the world owed him something. As if every step he took were a constant demand. "Out here again, Mom," he snapped with that tone that wasn't a yell, but hurt more than a yell. Carol didn't answer. She turned slowly, her gaze caressing the small, dry garden that Frank had tended with such care in other times. Now it was just dust and neglect. "It's cold out here, Mom. Go inside," Stephen ordered, closing the door behind him. They went into the kitchen. Stephen put a folder on the table, adjusted his reading glasses, and took out some papers. "What's that?" Carol asked, noticing the seal of a real estate agency. "Nothing that concerns you," he replied without looking at her. "It's work stuff." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to think that she still had some place in her children's lives, but something in her chest told her he was lying. She had known him since he was a baby. She knew when Stephen was hiding something, and he was doing it now. "Is it about the house?" she asked carefully, as if testing the water. "What?" "No. No, don't start, Mom. I already told you not to worry about those things. I just asked. Well, don't ask. He cut her off sharply. Look, you've lived a long time, Mom. We are the ones who have to figure out how to move forward. The house isn't functional anymore. It's old. It's damp. What if it collapses with you inside? Then the problem is mine. Carol clenched her teeth. Old, damp, useless, as if he were talking about the house, but also about her. Your dad and I built this house, she said in a firm yet shaky voice. Every brick, every penny. You were raised here. Yeah, and we appreciate it, okay? But the world changes. We can't live in the past. Stephen picked up the papers and went straight to the back room, the one that used to be Frank's. He closed the door. Carol remained standing there, feeling a pang shoot through her stomach. She didn't know if it was hunger or fear. Minutes later, Grace entered through the back door, talking on the phone, smiling as if nothing was wrong. She was carrying shopping bags, but not for her. She didn't even say hello. Carol only managed to hear one sentence through the noise of the cell phone. The appraiser said we could get up to $1,300,000 if we sought out the will. Carol's blood ran cold. The will? Were they talking about the house? She went up the stairs slowly, as if each step led her to a more painful reality. She entered her room, closed the door, and sat on the bed. She looked toward the wall where her wedding portrait with Frank still hung. Both of them young, happy, full of dreams. It was then that she remembered a conversation one night years ago. Frank sitting on that very bed with a serious look as if he already knew what was coming. Carol, he had said back then, if I'm ever gone, you make sure you search thoroughly. There are things no one else should find before you. At that moment, she hadn't paid attention. She thought it was the talk of a tired man, but now those words drilled into her memory. Carol got up, opened the drawer where she kept Frank's clothes, and began sifting through old shirts, folded receipts, and broken diaries. Nothing. Everything smelled of dust and the past. She knelt beside the dresser, that antique piece of pine furniture that Frank had bought in a flea market in Brooklyn. She ran her fingers over it, touching the back, the sides. Something was wrong. There was a gap she hadn't felt before, a separation between the wood, a false space. She tapped it with her knuckles. It sounded hollow, but she couldn't figure out how to open it. Just then, she heard Grace's voice from downstairs. Mom, Stephen says you're going to have to sign some papers tomorrow. Don't pretend you're asleep. Carol stayed still in front of the dresser, her hands on the wood, her heart beating so loud it seemed to break the silence of the room. And then, for the first time, she didn't feel fear. She felt rage, a silent, warm rage that reminded her who she was and everything she had suppressed for years. And while her daughter's voice called her from the kitchen, Carol closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision. Ms. Carol walked down the stairs, her gaze still fixed on her own hands. She had been locked in her room for over half an hour, touching that piece of furniture as if she could open it with the power of memory. She didn't say anything. She made no noise. She just walked down with that silent gait people have when they feel something slipping through their fingers, but they don't know what it is yet. When she reached the kitchen, she found Grace taking some containers out of the fridge. She didn't even look at her. It's your turn to sweep the patio today, right? She asked as if they were roommates, not mother and daughter. Carol nodded. It wasn't the first time they had spoken to her that way. But something inside her was beginning to make noise, a new noise, as if there was no room for more resignation inside. Grace placed a plate of cold rice and half a bruised banana on the table. Here, if you don't like it, there's old bread in the pantry, but don't you go making demands, okay? Carol didn't say anything. She walked slowly to the table, sat down, and began to eat in silence. The rice tasted like nothing. The banana had black spots. She chewed slowly as if she were afraid that plate would be the last one of the day. While she was eating, she heard the front door open. It was Rose. "Excuse me," she said from the entrance. "I have some leftover oatmeal cookies. Is Miss Carroll here?" Grace came out of the kitchen. "She's eating, but don't worry, you don't need to bring her things. We're taking care of her." Rose smiled without showing her teeth, but her eyes didn't smile with her. "I'm just stopping by to say hello." "If you'll permit me." She entered without waiting for an answer and peered into the kitchen. Seeing Carol eating that sad plate, she felt a lump in her throat. "How are you, dear? I brought you some cookies. They're not the fancy kind, but they're good." Carol looked up and for the first time in days smiled for real. She motioned for her to come closer. Rose sat down next to her. "I only have a little coffee left," Carol said. "But it's enough for both of us. Sharing one is plenty," Rose replied. As they shared the coffee, Grace slipped into her room, leaving the door ajar. From there, Carol heard her talking on the phone. Her tone was soft, but the words were like piercing needles. "Yes, the appraiser already came. He says if we remodel the bathroom and paint the facade, the house could easily go up. My mom doesn't have an opinion. She's old. She'll sign whatever we tell her to. She doesn't notice anything." Rose looked at her. Carol looked at her too. They didn't say a single word. But in that exchange of glances, there was an entire conversation. Rose finished her coffee and before leaving squeezed her arm tightly. "Stop by my place later. I want to show you something." "It's important." Carol nodded. Then she collected this plate, washed it patiently, wiped the table, and went out to the patio to sweep. Out there. While shaking the dry dirt between the dead flower pots, Carol thought about the phone call, about the furniture, about Frank's sentence that had been echoing in her mind for days. "There are things no one else should find before you." But what things? Suddenly, she heard Tony's voice from the entrance. "Mom, Grace says to collect your clothes from the clothesline. Some visitors are coming tomorrow." "Who's coming?" "A guy. He says he's gonna check a few things out. Nothing serious." Tony disappeared without waiting for an answer. Carol dropped the broom. Her throat went dry. She looked back toward the kitchen where the padlock was still firm on the refrigerator like a visible scar. She went up to Frank's room again, touched the furniture, checked one more time, and this time she noticed a slight scratch on the wood, as if someone else had already tried to open it before, someone who wasn't her. The scratch on the wood wasn't old. Miss Carroll knew it when she touched it, when she traced it with the tip of her finger. It was a new mark, slight, but not accidental. And in that house, coincidences no longer existed. Someone had tried to open the back of the dresser but hadn't succeeded, and that someone wasn't her. She kept silent. She sighed it long, deep, and let the air cleanse some of the rage growing inside her. Then she slowly went down the stairs and walked straight to the house next door. Rose was waiting for her with a cup of hot spice cider and 2 pieces of sweet cornbread. "I saw you from my window. You had that look on your face like something is eating you up inside," the neighbor said bluntly. "What happened now?" Carol sat down. She didn't answer immediately. She took the bread carefully, took a sip of the tea, and then with her gaze lost on the plastic tablecloth with faded flowers, she said, "Grace is hiding something. I know it. And Stephen is too. There's something strange about all this. Yesterday, I overheard them talking to an appraiser about the house. They say they're gonna sell it, that I just have to sign and that's it. As if I were an old piece of furniture. But Frank, he told me he had hidden something I should find." Rose lowered her voice. She leaned in a little. "Did you know that many years ago Frank came to see me one afternoon? He was serious, strange. He told me he was afraid of what his children might do to you, that he didn't trust Stephen." Carol looked up, surprised. "You never told me that." "Why?" "He gave me an envelope. He told me not to open it, to keep it, and only to hand it over if you ever asked me for it or if something very serious happened." Carol was speechless. Her heart was pounding, but she didn't say anything else. That conversation was enough to confirm what she suspected. Frank had anticipated something, and that something was beginning to happen. They spent the afternoon talking like two women sharing the same wound, the same disillusionment. That of having given everything and receiving abandonment. It was almost night when Carol returned home. Grace was waiting for her in the living room, sitting as if she had been counting the seconds. "Where were you?" she asked, arms crossed. "With Rose, with that woman again. You should stop telling her your business. She's not your family." Carol stared at her. "For the first time in a long time, my family no longer recognizes me." Grace scoffed and went toward the patio, leaving a thick silence behind her. Carol went up to her room. She sat on the bed and opened an old wooden box she had kept for years. Inside were her notebooks from when she and Frank were starting out together, their wedding day photos, and a couple of old receipts, including the one for the first payment on the lot. She remembered that day as if it were yesterday. It was the year 1972. Frank was barely 27 years old. She was 24. The lot was in a vacant dirt field with no electricity, no paved street. Nobody wanted to live there. But they saw it with different eyes. "We're gonna build our house here," Frank said, planting his feet firmly in the dust. "And where are we gonna get the money?" she asked, laughing. "I've already saved it. I worked double shifts for months, and Mr. Johnson, the welder, loaned me the rest." "What if we can't do it?" she insisted. "We will because we are doing this for them," he said, stroking her belly. "For our children. But most of all for you." Carol returned to the present with her eyes full of tears. She clenched the receipt between her fingers as if it were a shield, a proof, a warning. Suddenly, she heard a noise in the hallway. It was Tony. "Mom," he said in a low voice, "Stephen is coming tomorrow with the notary. They're going to need you to sign some papers. They didn't tell me exactly what they are, but you know how he gets if someone refuses." Carol looked at him from the doorway. "And what do you think?" "Tony?" He lowered his head. I don't want any trouble." And he left. She closed the door slowly. She sat on the bed again. There was no more room for doubt. Something big was being cooked up behind her back. She didn't sleep that night. She just waited for dawn. Because on the other side of the wall, Rose had been holding a sealed envelope for decades, and Ms. Carroll was ready to ask for it. Since before noon, Grace was bustling around the house like a busy bee. She moved from one side of the house to the other, moving furniture, mopping harder than necessary, and putting dishes in the oven without asking for help. Ms. Carroll, sitting in the rocking chair on the patio, watched everything with a silence that was becoming heavier and heavier. Something was cooking, and it wasn't just food. "I have company tonight," Grace said, wiping a crystal glass. "So please stay in your room. I don't want any scenes or questions." "Yes." Carol looked at her without moving. "Company from who?" "Friends from work, but also an important man is coming who is helping us with a matter. You don't need to know more." "And why do I have to hide?" "You're not hiding," Grace replied impatiently. "It's so you'll be more comfortable. You tend to say inappropriate things, and I don't want people to think we live poorly here." "Do you understand me?" Carol lowered her gaze. She nodded with a barely visible movement. She didn't have the strength to argue. "Not yet." The afternoon passed with dishes, fake laughter, background music, and the aroma of roasted meat. Carol from her room could hear everything. Grace's exaggerated laughter, the forced conversations, and a male voice she didn't recognize but who spoke freely, as if the house were his own. "And is this property free of legal issues?" the man asked between bites. "Completely," Grace said. "The house is in my mother's name, but she already gave us authorization for everything. The notary is coming tomorrow to review papers and sign. Everything is calm." Miss Carroll clenched her fist. Her heart was pounding against her chest. Authorization, everything is calm. She had given permission. She didn't even know exactly what they were talking about. But whatever it was, they were doing it without her. And the worst part, they were using her as a decorative figure, as an obstacle to be moved. Shortly after, someone knocked on her door. It was Tony. With a tray in his hands, he brought her a cold dinner, unsalted rice, reheated beans, and a stiff tortilla. "Sorry, Mom," he said in a low voice, "but there wasn't much left over." Carol looked at him for a long time. She didn't say anything. She just took the plate and closed the door gently. She ate in silence. With every spoonful, she thought of Frank's eyes, the promise he had made her, the document that Rose was still keeping, and how for the first time she didn't feel entirely alone. Around 9 o'clock that night, when the house had returned to silence and the guests had left, Carol went out to the patio with a blanket over her shoulder. She sat in her usual chair, looking up at the stars, letting the cool air dry the tears she could no longer hold back. It was then that she heard footsteps on the gravel. Rose was crossing the side path that connected the two houses. "I heard they locked you up today," she said, sitting down next to her. "They hid me," Carol corrected. "We're not going to let that happen anymore." They both remained silent for a moment. Then Rose took something out of her shawl, an old yellowish envelope with Frank's handwriting on the front. "Here's what your husband gave me. He told me that if things ever got ugly, you would know when to open it. And I think that day has come." Carol took it with both hands, looked at it as if it had fire inside, and without hesitating, tucked it under her blouse against her chest. "Thank you, dear friend. Tomorrow, when they come with their notaries and their lies, you won't be alone anymore." Miss Carol didn't answer. She just nodded, looking up at the sky. But inside, something had already awakened, because her freedom could be written on that envelope, and deep down, someone in that house already suspected it. Miss Carol woke up before the sun. She didn't close her eyes all night. The envelope that Rose had given her was now sleeping inside her bra next to her chest, as if it were a secret too alive to leave alone. She had thought of opening it right there in the early morning under the yellow light of her lamp. But something in her heart told her to wait, not out of fear, but out of respect, because Frank wasn't just any man, and that envelope wasn't just any envelope either. She fixed her hair in front of the mirror, smoothing the gray strands with her own hands. She put on the navy blue dress, the one she had worn to the last mass she went to with Frank. She put on a little of the perfume that was left in the bottle she had kept for years and walked down the stairs with dignity as if descending to the altar. The house was silent. Grace and Tony were still asleep. Stephen hadn't arrived. She walked to the kitchen, took old coffee from the pantry, and put it on the gas stove to boil. She poured only 1 cup. She sat at the usual table in front of the window and finally took out the envelope. She looked at it for a long time. Frank's handwriting was clear, firm, almost solemn. "For Carol, only you." She carefully slid her fingers along the edge. She opened it. There was a folded, time-yellowed sheet of paper with the letterhead of a law office in downtown Chicago and the signature of Attorney Arthur Smith. At first, the words didn't make sense to her, but as she read, her breathing slowed, her stomach tightened, and her throat closed up. Frank had left a will, and not just any will. In that document dated just a few months before his death, he declared that the entire house, the land, the assets, the improvements, everything built from 1972 to the present was to remain exclusively and totally in the name of his wife, Carol Baker, as long as she lived. And the most shocking part was at the end. "And upon my wife's passing, this estate will be irrevocably transferred to the person she designates as the beneficiary, provided that person has demonstrated true dignity, respect, and care during the last years of her life. If none of our children meets that condition, it will be transferred to whomever has, even if they are not related by blood." Carol felt her heart jump into her throat. That last sentence was not there by chance. Frank had written that with knowledge. He already knew. Maybe he knew before she did. She folded the paper again, put it back in her bra, got up from the table, and went straight to Rose's house. She knocked 3 times. Rose was already awake. "Did you open it?" she asked, knowing the answer without Carol saying anything. "Yes," she answered. "And now I understand a lot of things." They both sat in the living room, the one that always smelled of rosemary and freshly baked bread. Carol told her everything calmly without emitting a single word. When she finished, Rose stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "So, are you going to tell them?" "Not yet." "And what are you going to do?" "Wait for them to take the next step. And when they do, that's when I'll drop the truth on them." Just then, Rose's phone rang. It was an unknown number. Rose answered cautiously. "Hello?" A serious male voice spoke from the other end. "Is this Miss Carol Baker? I'm Attorney Galvives. Your children called me to review some deeds. We're coming over this afternoon. They told me you will sign without a problem. I just want to confirm you'll be available." Rose looked up and stared at Carol, who understood immediately. "Yes," Rose replied, lowering her voice. "She will be here. We'll be expecting you." She hung up. "They're coming today," she said. "Not tomorrow." "Today." "Perfect," Carol replied. "Then this afternoon they are going to find out who I am and who their father was." She got up. She walked back to her house with her head held high. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible because that document wasn't just a piece of paper. It was proof that there was still justice in a world that was crashing down on her. And what Miss Carol didn't know was that someone had already smelled the fear because that same morning, Grace would enter her room without warning and find the drawer empty. It was 8 o'clock in the morning when Grace shoved open M. Carol's bedroom door with her shoulder. She didn't knock. She didn't announce herself. She entered with that sense of ownership that had been forming in her since she moved back into that house, as if being born there entitled her to everything, even her mother's privacy. "Mom, are you awake?" she asked in a false tone, as if speaking to a silly child. Miss Carol was not there. The bed was made. The room in order, not a trace of her. Grace frowned. She walked to the dresser, opened drawers. She searched in a hurry. The back drawer, the one where she had once found some old notebooks, was now empty. She looked under the bed. Nothing. She stormed downstairs in a fury. "Tony, have you seen Mom?" she yelled from the kitchen. "No." "Why?" "She's not here. And she didn't leave a note or anything. And what are you worried about? She probably went to Ross's. She's always glued to that old woman." Grace didn't answer. She rested her hands on the kitchen counter. She closed her eyes for a second. She was agitated even though she didn't want to admit it. She bit her thumbnail while her mind went back to a scene from more than 15 years ago. She had recently separated from her children's father. She had returned home with her 2 small children with no money, no job, and her pride shattered. Frank was still alive and accepted her without conditions. But one afternoon, while sweeping the back room, she saw her father sealing an envelope with a serious look. He put it in a box and hid it behind the dresser. Grace didn't ask, but she didn't forget. Years later, after Frank had died, she tried to move that furniture looking for valuable papers. She found the box empty. Now that emptiness weighed on her like a stone in her stomach. At Rose's house, the atmosphere was different. Miss Carol was sitting at the table with a cup of chamomile tea in her hands. In front of her, an open Bible. Inside, a folded photograph which she herself had saved years ago. On the back, written in Frank's shaky but firm handwriting, it said, "When you read this, remember what I hid for you. The correct name is there. Don't trust anyone who hasn't taken care of you." Carol had already read it 3 times. She still didn't fully understand what he was referring to. The correct name of what? Of whom? "Are you sure you don't want to read the document again?" Rose asked from the stove. "I already read it, dear friend. I know what it says. But there's something else. He left something between the lines. He didn't just leave me the house. He left me a decision." "Which one?" The document says that when I die, the property passes to the person I designate, provided they have demonstrated dignity and respect. Rose looked at her bewildered. So Frank knew his children would fail. He wrote it with full intention, but he also knew that someone would take care of me. Someone who is not blood, but his family in my life. Rose didn't know what to say. She lowered her gaze. Something moved forcefully in her chest. She didn't say a word, but there were contained tears in her eyes. Hours later, the doorbell rang. "That must be them," Rose said, looking out the window. They arrived. Ms. Carroll slowly stood up. She walked to the door calmly but firmly. She opened it. There were Stephen, Grace, and a suited man with a clipboard in his hand. "Attorney Galvives. Miss Carroll, it's a pleasure. I'm the notary your daughter hired to formalize some procedures. May we come in?" "No," she replied without hesitation. "We're not signing anything here today. If you want to talk about papers, it will be somewhere else and with a different lawyer." Grace approached, clenching her teeth. "Mom, what are you saying? Are you okay?" "Better than ever." Carol took the original document that Frank had drafted out of her purse. She held it with both hands like someone raising a banner. "Here is the only paper that matters." Stephen tried to snatch it away. Carol pulled it back immediately. "Don't you dare!" she yelled. "This house is not in your name. Not yours, Grace. Not Tony's. It's in my name and after me. It will belong to the person who has been by my side, not the one who locks me up, insults me, or feeds me scraps." Silence fell like a stone. The uncomfortable notary adjusted his glasses. "With all due respect, if there is a previous document, this changes everything." "That's right," Carol said. "And it doesn't just change everything. This is just beginning." Stephen clenched his fists. Grace turned pale. Tony, on the other hand, he didn't say anything. He just lowered his gaze. And there in that hallway, Ms. Carroll knew that her fight was no longer a secret. It was open. It was real. And the house wasn't the only thing she was going to defend. The slamming of the door echoed throughout the house. Stephen left in a fury and crossed the yard without looking at anyone. Grace went after him, upset, but more worried than angry. The uncomfortable notary said goodbye with a half-hearted handshake and drove away without looking back. Miss Carroll remained standing there in the entrance, firm. The document was still in her hand, folded, but intact. Her fingers were trembling, but not from fear, but from strength, the same strength that hadn't emerged in years, the one that had been buried since Frank died. Rose, who had witnessed everything from the porch, offered her arm. Carol gently refused it. "I don't need to be held up today, dear friend. I can stand on my own today." They both smiled. The kind of smile that is born when the soul finally breathes. But the calm didn't last long. Tony entered after the others, walking slowly. He didn't say anything. He just walked past Carol with his head down as if he didn't know whether he should feel ashamed or relieved. And that doubt was harder than any word. The house fell into a strange silence. The children didn't say a word all afternoon, not a direct complaint nor a shout, but the atmosphere became thick. Every step Carol took down the hallway was observed by eyes that no longer disguised their discomfort. That night, no one offered her dinner. No one asked her if she was hungry. Without asking for anything, she ate what was left of the rice that Rose had sent her days before, heating it patiently in an old pot, sitting alone in the kitchen and chewing in silence. There was no bitterness in her expression, only a bitter peace, that of someone who no longer expects anything from anyone. The next day, Stephen didn't sleep at home. Grace didn't show up either, but Tony did, and it was he who broke the ice. "Are you really going to leave this house like this?" he asked while drinking water from the dispenser, without sharing anything. Carol looked up from the patio where she was watering the plants. "Like what?" "Well, just for you. You don't even need that much anymore. We have families." She put the hose aside, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked to the door. You have a family. Tony, but I had one too. I changed your diapers, cured your fever, cooked for you with the little we had, and now you hide my bread. You give me the leftovers and treat me like a nuisance, and you still talk about sharing. Tony didn't answer. He went to his room without looking back. In the evening, Grace returned. She came in without saying hello, but she didn't lock herself in as usual. She went straight up to Carol's room. She found her sitting on the bed, calmly embroidering. "Where's the will?" "I have it put away," she said without turning to look at her. "I want to see it." "You don't need to see it. You already know it." "Why are you doing this to me, Mom?" Carol let go of the thread, took off her glasses, and looked at her firmly. "I'm not doing anything to you, Grace. You did this to yourself. I didn't sign your contempt or your indifference. I didn't draft your insults or the padlock on the kitchen. You signed all that. You've always preferred Rose over us because she respects me and because she has never made me feel small. Can you say the same?" Grace couldn't hold her gaze. She closed the door with a slight bang and ran down the stairs. Minutes later, Carol heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. Then a low voice. It was Stephen. He was back. "We have to do something now. If we don't sign that sale, we lose the deal. What if we convince her?" "With what?" "More contempt. We could, I don't know, try to make her look bad. Say she's losing her memory or that she's not in her right mind." There was a brief silence. "You're serious. If we don't do something, we're going to lose everything." The words reached Carol from behind the half-open door. "I don't need anything more." She didn't sleep that night. She stayed seated alone with Frank's document in her hands. And at the bottom of the paper, she read again the sentence that was beginning to be engraved in her soul. The correct name is there. "Don't trust anyone who hasn't taken care of you." Then a doubt pierced her like lightning. What name had Frank really put after hers? She got up from the bed in a hurry, turned on the lamp and checked the will again. And there, at the end of the document, almost like an additional note, there was a second name. One that was none of her children. One that until that moment she didn't know was written there. Ms. Carroll sat on the edge of the bed with the document in her hands. The silence of the room was so thick she could hear the faint buzz of the light bulb hanging from the ceiling. But she wasn't paying attention. All her mind was fixed on that name written at the end of the will. There it was, in clear handwriting, and the notary's signature. In the event that Miss Carol Baker does not designate an explicit beneficiary before her death, the property will be transferred to Ms. Rose Carter, the family's neighbor, a person of complete trust of the testator for having demonstrated care, respect, and faithful companionship during the years following his medical diagnosis. Carol swallowed. It was not a surprise, but it was. Frank had left Rose's name, legal, written, signed, sealed. For a second she felt guilty, not for what the will said, but for what she knew was coming. The fury of her children, their humiliation in knowing that by their father's direct choice, a woman who was not their blood would be the heir, and not out of revenge, but out of merit. Outside the house was in shadows, but the tension was so real it could almost be touched. Grace was pacing the hallway. She went back and forth as if her body was searching for a way out that her pride would not allow her to ask for. Stephen was sitting in the living room with a warm beer in his hand and his eyes fixed on the floor. Tony had left early and hadn't returned. "I can't believe it," Grace said, barely audible. "Rose, that woman is gonna keep all this." "We don't even know if it's true," Stephen replied, although he knew it was. "And what are we gonna do? Wait for them to kick us out?" Stephen stood up abruptly. "Shut up. Don't talk to me like that. We'll fix this. She's not gonna get away with it." "And how?" "Huh? Are you gonna force her to sign something?" "There are other ways." "What do you mean?" Stephen didn't answer. He just pressed his lips together. Then he went to the kitchen, opened the fridge, looked at it empty, and closed it forcefully. "There's nothing," he said. "She didn't even leave us food. She's playing games with us." Grace walked over to the dining room and leaned against the wall. "And what if it is Rose who's taking it? That she's passing her groceries in secret? And if she is, yes, she is. She's stealing what belongs to us." "What belongs to us?" Stephen turned round furiously. "The only thing that belongs to us is what we can get out before this gets out of our hands." The next morning, Carol went to see Rose. She crossed the side alley with the document wrapped in a handkerchief. She knocked twice. The door opened immediately. "You read the whole thing?" Rose asked, her face tenser than usual. "Yes, and there's something you need to know." She showed her the final paragraph. Rose read it carefully, and when she finished, she remained motionless. "It can't be. Frank thought of you. He named you. You are the other heir." Rose shook her head as if she didn't want to accept the truth. "I never expected that. I swear, never. I know, dear friend," Carol said, taking her hand. "But it's not something you sought. It's something he saw, and he made it clear." Rose remained silent. "And what are you going to do?" she finally asked. "I don't know yet. But what I am clear about is that this house is not going to end up in the hands of those who left me without food. They locked me in my room and tried to make me disappear." "And your children?" "My children stopped being my children a long time ago. I gave birth to them, but I no longer recognize them." That same day, Grace went to the grocery store. She returned with full bags, but not to share. She locked everything away in the pantry. She put a new padlock on the fridge, thicker than the previous one. Tony tried to take a soda and couldn't. "What is this control?" Grace said, "If Mom wants to play hardball, so will we." Carol arrived just as Grace was locking the pantry. "Now you're going to hide the food from me too. It's not hiding, Mom. It's organizing. This is not like before. If you decide to act on your own, so will we." Carol didn't say anything. She walked straight to the dining room. She sat in her usual spot and took a small key out of her pocket. "Are you looking for this?" she asked, raising it slightly. Grace froze. "How?" "I found it in Frank's bag where the will was also." There was a silence. Carol looked at her calmly. "Do you know what this key opens, Grace?" She didn't answer. "I do know, and you do too." Rose had said a few days ago there was a hidden compartment, and Frank had told her not to trust anyone, not even her children. Carol got up from the table, walked toward Frank's room, and without looking back said, "Now I'm going to open what he left hidden, and if I find what I think is there, you and your brothers are going to find out something you never expected." Grace stood there paralyzed because she did know. She knew perfectly well what was inside that piece of furniture because years ago she had already found it, and what she did afterward was hide the key. Only now that key was once again in Miss Carol's hands. Miss Carol went up the stairs with the key clenched in her fist. Every step hurt her knees, but she didn't stop. Her heart was pounding, not only because of the revelation of the will, but because she knew that what she was about to do would forever close one stage of her life and open another that would have no return. Grace was following her a few feet behind with muffled steps. She didn't speak, but her rage was visible even in her breathing. It wasn't the first time they had clashed, but this time it was different. Carol wasn't walking with fear. She was walking with purpose. She entered Frank's room and turned on the bedside lamp. The warm light illuminated the old pine dresser, the one that had survived 3 moves, 2 floods, and the passage of time. Carol caressed it like greeting an old friend. She knelt in front of the furniture, slid her hand along the bottom, and found the exact edge where Frank had placed the false compartment. She felt it. She tapped it with her knuckles. It sounded hollow. "What are you doing?" Grace said from the doorway. "What I should have done years ago." Carol inserted the key into a small crack between the boards. She turned it. The click was dry. Definitive. The back of the dresser loosened. She carefully removed it. Inside was a box wrapped in a white cloth folded meticulously. Carol took it out and put it on the bed. Grace took a step forward, but her mother raised her hand. "Not you. Not yet." She unwrapped the cloth. Inside the box were several sealed envelopes, all with different dates. Also, a black notebook with the word personal written in permanent marker, and at the bottom, a plastic bag with photographs. Carol opened the notebook first. The first pages were medical notes, doctors' names, appointment dates, then pages filled with Frank's reflections written in his own hand. "Today, Tony asked me for money for a truck. He doesn't need it, but he insists. Carol doesn't know. I don't want to tell her." Grace argued with her mother again. "She won't leave her alone. Sometimes I wonder if she realizes the harm she is doing. Carol doesn't know that I changed the will, not because I distrust her, but because of them. If something ever happens to me, I want her to have a way to defend herself." Carol's hands trembled as she read. She turned each page with the lump in her throat. Everything was there. The slow and painful process in which Frank realized little by little that his own children were drifting away, not out of necessity, but out of coldness. Then she opened the envelopes. One contained the receipt for the original purchase of the lot signed in the names of Frank and Carol. Another a copy of the previous will in which the children did appear as heirs, crossed out by hand with a note written by Frank himself. Annulled by personal will. They are not worthy. Grace approached closer. "What are you going to do with all that?" Carol didn't answer. She took out the photos. They were old. Some of the house being built, others of the children's births. But there was one in particular that chilled her blood. An image of Frank in the hospital bed with a bruise on his arm, and Stephen sitting next to him with his gaze lowered. On the back of the photo, a note. "He didn't want to explain to me how I fell out of the chair. He picked me up off of the floor but left me alone an hour later." Carol swallowed. That photo was taken a few days before he died, and although the official diagnosis said accidental fall, the doubt that Frank had expressed there said everything. She put the things away again, closed the box, and finally looked at Grace. "I know what I have to do. What are you going to do, Mom? I'm going to protect this house, but not just from you, from the shame you left me." Grace followed her as she went downstairs. But when she reached the last step, Carol stopped and looked at her directly. "You knew that box was there, didn't you?" Grace didn't answer. "You saw it, and you closed it again, and you stole the key. That was a long time ago, and you didn't say anything." "Why?" Because I was afraid. Stephen said that if we didn't secure the house, we would be left with nothing, and that's why you locked me up. You left me without food. Is that why?" Grace lowered her head, her lips trembling. "We didn't know what else to do." Carol felt a deep emptiness, as if she finally understood something she had been denying for years. It wasn't about necessity. It was about ambition. And ambition had rotted everything. That night, she went to Rose's house. She showed her the box, the letters, the notebook, the photos, everything. And Rose, after looking at each piece, said, "Carol, there is enough here to defend yourself with lawyers, a notary, and a judge." "I don't want to defend myself," she replied. "I want the truth to be known." "Are you going to tell it?" "No, someone else is going to tell it. And it's going to be to their face with everyone present. When they dare to do what they are already planning." Rose stared at her. "What do you think they're going to do?" Carol sighed. "They're going to try to kick me out of my own house. And when they do, that's where it all ends." And that prophecy, without her knowing it, was about to be fulfilled. Because that same night, in a closed-door call, Stephen was already negotiating with someone who had no scruples and was willing to do anything. It was Wednesday. The sun hadn't even fully risen when Carol went down to the kitchen. No one was there, neither Stephen nor Tony nor Grace. Everything was in its place, but the atmosphere was strange, as if the air weighed more than usual. She opened the pantry and, as expected, it was padlocked. The refrigerator, too. She wasn't surprised. She poured herself a glass of water from the dispenser, sat in her usual chair by the window, and looked out at the patio as if waiting for Frank to appear at any moment with his paint-stained apron and a simple smile, asking her if she wanted a bagel with coffee. But there was no bread, no coffee, and no Frank. Just silence. That same silence was broken around 8 o'clock when Grace came downstairs with her cell phone to her ear, laughing falsely with that forced tone that Carol knew by heart. "Yes, of course, counselor," she was saying. "My mom has no problem confirming. Everything is already arranged." Carol slowly turned her face. "Who are you talking to?" Grace covered the phone with her hand. "Business, Mom. Things that don't concern you." "Why don't you go out to the patio for a while?" "Okay." Carol didn't answer. She just got up, took her shawl, and went out to the side path. She sat on a small concrete bench that Frank had built for her when they were still painting the walls together, when there was still no distance between mother and children. She spent over an hour there in silence, her gaze fixed on the dry plants until Rose arrived. "I brought you some rice pudding," she said, holding a container with a blue lid. "Well-aid, just the way Frank liked it." Carol looked at her with a slight smile. "Now I understand why he had you in mind." Rose sat down next to her. "And you? Have you decided yet?" "Not yet, but it won't be long now." Carol told her about the letters found in the dresser, about the photographs, about the note with the bruise on Frank's arm. Rose listened to everything without interrupting, without judging, as true friends do. "And what do you plan to do with that?" she finally asked. "I'll keep it for now. But if they try to take one more step, my patience runs out." Just then, the main gate opened abruptly. It was Stephen, accompanied by a tall man in a white shirt and dark glasses. He looked like a lawyer. But he wasn't carrying a briefcase. He had malice on his face. "That's the guy who came last time," Rose whispered. Carol got up and walked straight to the living room. The man nodded, polite but cold. "Good morning, Mom. We're here to review some documents. It's just a matter of signing." "What documents?" "The sale documents, Mom," Stephen said, standing behind the man as if he were his shadow. "We already talked about it. You won't lose anything. You'll be well cared for." "And in exchange for what?" Carol asked, for walking out the door as if I hadn't lived here for 40 years. "We're not going to argue again, Mom. Sign and everything will be solved." Carol took a deep breath. "And what if I don't sign?" "Well," then the man in the white shirt intervened. "Everything gets complicated. Legally, the house already has interested buyers, and if there is no agreement, we might have to move the process through another channel." Carol stared at him. "Are you threatening me?" "No." "Mom, I'm explaining the consequences. The consequences of being the owner of my own house." Stephen made a gesture with his hands. "Mom, don't exaggerate. We're not going to kick you out. We're just going to sell. You'll have your space and we'll support you. You'll support me with cold soup, with the fridge locked, with hidden keys." Grace entered the conversation from the kitchen. "You're making unnecessary drama. No one wants to hurt you. You've been hurting me for years. But I won't let you anymore." The man in dark glasses took a folder from his backpack and placed it on the table. "We'll leave this here for you. Read it calmly, but don't take too long. The buyer is waiting." Carol didn't open it. She didn't touch the folder. She just said, "Tell the buyer to buy something else. This house is not for sale." That night, while everyone was asleep, Carol went down to the kitchen. The fridge was still padlocked, but she didn't care anymore. She poured herself a glass of water and walked to the living room. The folder was there. She opened it out of curiosity, and there she saw it. Not only had they forged her signature on a draft, they had also presented papers as if she had already agreed. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a crime. She sat down on the armchair, and as she held that folder in her hand, her gaze hardened. Her inner voice no longer trembled. She knew what she had to do, and she knew exactly who to call the next day. Because one thing was for them to despise her, but another entirely was for them to believe she would never defend herself. The first ray of sun on that Thursday entered through the window of the sewing room. Miss Carroll was already awake. She had gotten up with the first crow of the rooster, and not because she had obligations, but because the rage hadn't let her sleep. She had the false sale document on the dining table. Beside it, the original will, Frank's letters. And the photograph with the bruise. Everything in order, everything ready. But one thing was still missing: evidence. Because in that twisted world where appearances are worth more than history, it wasn't enough to remember what had been lived. She had to prove it with dates, with ink, with objects, and Carol sensed that there was still something hidden in that house that could seal her defense. It was then that she remembered the dress. An old, dusty rose-gold one that Frank had given her for her 40th birthday. She had worn it little, but she kept it fondly. It was in the dresser inside a cloth bag. That garment had something special. Frank himself had had a small inscription embroidered on the inside that said, "For when you miss me, or I miss you." Carol went for it with determined hands. She took it out, spread it on the bed, and patiently began to check the seams, the linings, the folds, and there, between the inner seam of the right sleeve, she felt a lump, small, thin, hard. With an old pair of scissors and great care, she unstitched the edge. There was an envelope folded in 3 parts, yellowed with time, with no sender. Her heart raced. She opened it, but the envelope was empty. There was no letter, no paper. There was nothing. Just air and a distant smell of men's cologne, the same one Frank used on Sundays for church. Carol closed her eyes. She felt her stomach churn. The emptiness she felt was not just physical, it was emotional. Where was what was supposed to be inside? Had they taken it? Had Frank taken it out or someone else? She looked at the seam again. It wasn't freshly opened. There were signs that it had been opened before. The thread was different from the rest of the dress, lighter, tighter, and then she understood. Someone found it before her and took it out. Carol remained sitting on the bed, holding the empty envelope as if it were proof of betrayal. And there was one person in that house who knew how to sew: Grace. Carol went down to the kitchen. Grace was there drinking coffee, leafing through a magazine. "Was it you?" she asked directly. Grace didn't even feign surprise. "What are you talking about? The envelope, the dress? You opened it. You sewed it back up. Where is what was inside? Are you crazy? Where is it?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Grace repeated, getting up. "But if you're losing your memory, it's not my fault." Carol approached her. "If you're still keeping something, I suggest you return it because what's coming is no small matter. And if there was something in that paper that could help you, you still have time to save yourself." Grace looked down for just a second, but that gesture was enough. Carol no longer needed more proof. Betrayal doesn't always show up with shouts. Sometimes it hides in the eyes that cannot look you in the face. At dusk, Rose arrived with sweet cornbread. "I stopped by the church today and ran into Mr. Johnson," she said. "He asked about you. Is he still living near the corner?" "Yes, and he told me something strange. That Frank, shortly before he died, went to his house to leave an envelope. I got the impression it wasn't for him, but for safekeeping." Carol froze. "An envelope?" "Yes. He said Frank asked him not to read it, to only hand it over if you ever asked him for it." Carol didn't say anything. She just stood up. "Let's go get it," she said. "Right now." Minutes later, they were knocking on Mr. Johnson's door. The old man greeted them in his work shirt, his glasses hanging from his neck, and his cane in his hand. "I knew you were going to come," he said. "Come in." He led them to a chest of drawers at the back of the living room. He opened the 3rd drawer. He took out a small wooden box. He opened it. Inside was an envelope sealed in perfect condition. It had written on it, "If my children fail, this envelope will speak for me." Carol took it with trembling hands. Mr. Johnson spoke slowly. "Frank left it with me the day after Grace came to yell at him in the yard. That day he locked himself away for hours. The next day he arrived with this envelope, and you never opened it. He asked me as a favor between old friends, and I keep favors between old friends until I die." Carol gave him a long hug. "Thank you from the bottom of my heart." "You take care," he replied, "because what's happening in your house isn't just anger. It's greed." That night, Carol returned home and locked herself in her room. She opened the envelope, and upon reading the letter, she finally understood why Frank had hidden everything. Because what was written there wasn't a simple warning. It was a confession, one that changed everything she thought she knew, even about her own marriage. The handwriting was unmistakable. Large, precise, with that peculiar way Frank had of tracing the F as if he were drawing a tilted flag. Carol held the sheet with both hands. It was the same paper as her personal notebooks, carefully torn out without wrinkles. It was written on both sides. It wasn't a letter to cry over. It was a letter to understand, to open old wounds, and also to close others that Carol didn't even know were still open. She took a deep breath and began to read. "Carol, if you are reading this, it's because things happened just as I imagined. I don't know when it will be or how, but something tells me that sooner or later our children will show their true faces. Forgive me for putting it this way, but I'm no longer afraid to say what I see. I don't want this letter to hurt you. I want it to open your eyes. I trusted for a long time that they would change, that they would grow up with gratitude, but the truth is, we made a mistake. We raised them with love, but also with guilt. And guilt spoils. Do you remember when Grace stole from the safe and swore it was for an emergency? We believed her. You gave her even your mother's necklace. I gave her money and she never returned anything. And Stephen, he always wanted to be in charge. He never knew how to listen. When we refused to sell the house for the first time, he stopped talking to us for a month. Then he came back as if nothing had happened. But I already knew he didn't come back out of affection. He came back for the house. And Tony, he hurts me the most because he did have a heart. But he preferred to remain silent. And he who remains silent, Bung, while others do harm also hurts. We made a mistake, Carol. We thought blood was thicker than respect, and it's not. Respect is the true inheritance. Carol felt her throat close up. She turned the page and continued reading. I want you to know that if I chose to leave the house in your name and then give the option to Rose, it was because I saw you. Because I saw how you were slowly fading away while they divided the remains of your joy. She is not our blood, but she has treated you better than all our children combined. If you ever confront them, don't be afraid. Use this letter. Use everything I hid. I wasn't firm enough in life, but in death, I want to be your walking stick. That's also why I made an additional copy of the will and left it with Mr. Johnson. Because if my children were to destroy the original, you could still have something to defend yourself with. The house is yours. The silence they sowed. Don't cultivate it anymore. Raise your voice. Do it for yourself. Do it for me. And if you feel lonely, look up at the sky. I am there. I always was. Even if sometimes I didn't know how to show you. Carol didn't cry. Not a single tear. But it hurt. It hurt to read words from her husband that she never heard in life. Words that she needed and that only now on paper reached her like belated caresses, like a forgiveness that hadn't been spoken, but that she had also been waiting for. She put the letter back in the envelope. She folded everything carefully. She hid it inside her bra, as was now her custom, and she got up. She went straight to the small altar she had in her room. She lit a candle. She looked at her wedding photograph and she murmured, Frank, now you really left me a sign. That same afternoon, Rose entered with hurried steps and a tense face. Carol, we need to talk. What happened? I was downtown today. I went to the bank to make a payment, and I ran into the same guy who came with Steven the other day. The one in the white suit. The fake notary. I don't know if he's a notary, but I saw him talking to a man who works at the public registry. I know him. His name is John, and he didn't give me a good feeling. They were saying that they had everything ready to force the lady out. Carol remained silent. Are you sure? I heard it with these ears. John told him, if the old woman doesn't want to leave willingly, oh well, with the fake signature, the rest will be swallowed by the paperwork. Carol stood up. Then it's no longer a suspicion. It's a war. What are you going to do? I'm going to protect what's mine. Hours later, Carol went to Mr. Johnson's house for the copy of the will. He already had it ready. He also gave her a paper with a notarized letter confirming that he had received the envelope directly from Frank with a date and signature in his own hand. Rose took time off from the hardware store where she worked part-time and accompanied her to the office of Attorney Ramirez, the lawyer who had helped her resolve a family dispute years ago. Attorney, Carol said as she placed all the documents on the desk, I need you to help me. I don't want revenge. I just want justice. Ramirez read everything in silence for almost half an hour. When he finished, he looked at Carol with respect. You have what very few people manage to gather. Truth and evidence. So, what's next? What's next is that your children don't know that you are no longer alone. Carol settled into the chair. And they also don't know that I am no longer afraid to say everything I kept silent about for years. And just as she was leaving the office, Rose's cell phone rang. She answered it on speakerphone. It was Tony, and his voice for the first time sounded broken. Miss Carol, you have to come back. Steven is out of control, and Grace, she's calling an ambulance to take you to the psychiatric hospital. She says, you've lost your mind. Carol didn't say a single word all the way back. The taxi ride from the lawyer's office to her house seemed longer than usual. She looked out the window, but she didn't see the street. Her mind repeated the last sentence Tony had told her on the phone, like an echo that wouldn't stop. Grace is calling an ambulance to take you to the psychiatric hospital. Rose was sitting next to her, clenching her teeth in silence. She knew that saying anything at that moment would only ignite the spark that Carol had been accumulating for weeks. It wasn't time for comfort. It was time for preparation. The taxi stopped a few feet from the entrance. In the distance, a police car was parked. And to one side, a municipal ambulance with its lights on, but without the siren. A nurse in a reflective vest was talking to Grace on the sidewalk. Carol got out of the car without saying anything. She walked straight as if she didn't feel the weight of her 75 years. Grace, seeing her, feigned surprise. Mom, I'm glad you arrived. Look, it's for your own good. We're all worried about you. You're saying things that don't make sense. You're hiding papers, talking to yourself at night, isolating yourself, and that justifies calling an ambulance. It's just an evaluation, a checkup. The doctors will determine if you need to rest for a few days. It's nothing serious. Rest from what, Grace? From you trying to sell my house with a fake signature? From you denying me food? Or from Frank leaving a will that rips the keys to this house out of your hands? The nurse approached with a tablet in her hand. Are you Ms. Carol Baker? I am, she replied in a firm voice. We are here at family request. We were reported possible disorientation and symptoms of cognitive decline. We want to take you for an evaluation at the General Hospital. It's routine. Routine, Rose intervened. Taking a healthy woman against her will is routine. We are only following protocol, the nurse replied, avoiding eye contact. Well, I also have a protocol, Carol said, opening her purse. She took out a perfectly organized folder with the will documents, Frank's letter, Attorney Ramirez's legal certification, and Mr. Johnson's sworn statement. She handed the folder to the nurse. Here's everything. Legally, this house is mine. Here are my rights, my papers, my voice, and if you take me, I swear a judge will see this with cameras and a notary." "Mom, you're delusional?" Grace murmured, her voice trembling. Carol looked at her. "Delusional? Let's see. Who forged my signature on those papers? Who gave documents to that notary in the white suit saying that I had authorized the sale of the house? Who put a padlock on my refrigerator and gave me cold soup while you ate in the living room?" Stephen came out at that moment through the front door. He looked freshly woken up, barefoot and with a frown. "What's going on here? Your sister called an ambulance. Rose told him to take your mother away as if she were crazy, as if she were a burden." Stephen didn't know what to say. He stared at the folder that the nurse was now carefully looking through. There were official seals, signatures, dates, names of witnesses, notarial references. This seems authentic," the nurse said. "And if it is, you as children cannot make decisions without the legal authorization of the lady." "And what does that mean?" Grace asked, now pale. "It means that if she refuses to come with us, we cannot force her. And if you insist, we might have to report an attempted illegal deprivation of liberty." "That's an exaggeration," Stephen yelled. "We just want to help her." "Then help me by collecting your things," Carol replied, "because you're not sleeping here tonight." There was a silence so tense that the whole street seemed to freeze. The wind stopped moving. Even the neighbor's dog fell silent. The nurse closed the folder carefully and returned it to Carol. "We are leaving. Good evening." The ambulance drove away with its lights off. Grace, trembling with rage, went inside the house without saying anything. Stephen remained on the sidewalk, not knowing where to look. Rose hugged Carol tightly. "You defended yourself like no one else." "My hands didn't tremble today," she said, "and my voice won't tremble tomorrow either." That same night, Ms. Carroll slept with the door closed but not locked. She was no longer afraid. What she didn't know was that the next morning, Stephen would make a secret visit to the public property registry, and there he would discover something that would take his breath away, because Frank had also anticipated his next move. It was just past 9 o'clock in the morning when Stephen arrived at the public property registry office in downtown Chicago. He wasn't wearing a suit or a formal shirt as he used to in his office days. That morning, he wore a gray sweatshirt with his cap low, trying to go unnoticed, but his intentions were not small. He asked for a turn at the internal inquiries window. He didn't want to leave any traces. He said he was there as a citizen to check the status of a family property, the house where he had grown up, the one that, according to him, already belonged to him de facto, even if his name wasn't on any paper, and that was why he was there. He wanted to know exactly how far his mother's rights extended and how much he could force his own. While waiting for his turn, he nervously checked his cell phone. There was no news from Grace since the day before. After the failed ambulance attempt, she had locked herself in the guest room with her face swollen with anger. Tony was still missing, and Rose, the nosy neighbor, the one who had always annoyed him, was now stronger than she seemed. "Number 243, a voice called from window number 7. Stephen approached. "Good morning. I'm here to check the legal status of a property. It's my mother's house. But I have doubts about the document she recently presented. Are you the owner?" "I'm the son. I've lived there almost all my life. I'm here representing the family." The woman behind the counter didn't look up. She typed in some data. Full name of the title holder: Carol Baker. Exact address. Stephen gave it to her letter by letter. She kept typing unhurriedly. 3 minutes passed in silence. He became impatient, moving his foot, looking around. "Here it is," the official said without emotion. "And what does it show? Ms. Carroll is the sole registered owner with a valid deed since the year 2001. Notarized and sealed deed before a public notary. And any recent updates?" "Yes," the woman replied with a slight pause. There was a precautionary annotation in the registry 5 years ago at the request of Mr. Frank Baker, now deceased. It is a legal measure used when the owner anticipates possible future disputes, very common in inheritance cases. Stephen frowned. And what does that annotation say? That the property cannot be modified or sold under any circumstances without the written approval of the current title holder, and that in the event of the lady's death, the property will pass to the secondary beneficiary registered in Testamentary Appendix Number 2, a document that is also sealed and filed here. Stephen swallowed. And who is that beneficiary? The woman finally looked up. I cannot reveal that if you are not the authorized person. I am the son. Doesn't it show me as a beneficiary? What do you mean, no? Who is listed then? The woman didn't answer. Is it Rose Carter? The official looked down at the monitor again. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. Stephen took a step back. Can I request a copy of that file? Not without a court order or without being the title holder or the registered beneficiary. This is an abuse. It's my family. It's my house. No, sir, she said firmly. It's your mother's house. Stephen left furiously. There was no wind, but his hands felt cold. He was sweating. He was breathing heavily. People looked at him as they passed on the sidewalk, but he didn't see anyone. He walked like a madman through the streets of downtown Chicago aimlessly. He stopped in an alley and called Grace. What do you want? She said, still with a muffled voice. We got ourselves into a bigger problem than I thought. What happened? I went to the registry. Frank legally sealed the property. He put a legal padlock on it 5 years ago. Rose is named as the beneficiary if Mom dies and the house cannot be touched while she is alive. And now we have to speed everything up. Speed up what? Get her to sign or let whatever has to happen happen. But that house is not going to belong to a nosy old woman or Mom or anyone else. That same afternoon, Stephen returned home. He entered without greeting anyone. Carol was in the kitchen heating up some rice that Rose had brought her. The fridge was no longer padlocked. He looked at her sideways. You went to the registry, didn't you? She didn't answer. She just stirred the rice with a wooden spoon. I know everything, he said. Then there's nothing left to explain. Are you happy dividing the family? Throwing everything away? You divided the family. I'm just picking up the pieces. Stephen clenched his fists. You're playing with fire. With no son, you lit the house on fire. I'm just protecting the walls so the foundations don't burn down. That night, Carol slept lightly. She knew the storm was coming, but she also knew that now she had a shield. She had evidence, she had memory, and she had Rose. But at dawn the next day, a noise in the backyard woke her up. She went out with her shawl over her shoulder, and there in the back garden, she found Frank's box of photos thrown on the ground, wet, open, and several letters. They were no longer there. The cold morning hit her bones directly, but Miss Carol didn't care. She walked barefoot on the cement floor of the back patio with her robe askew and her hair loose until she reached the box. The wooden box that had held her husband's most personal memories for years. Now it was soaked open, and half of its contents were scattered between the mud and the gravel. Frank's letters, the photos from when he worked at the foundry, the tickets from the first movie they saw together at the local theater. Wet, torn, trampled. Carol knelt down with difficulty. Her hands were trembling, but not from age. It was rage, a muffled, contained rage, the same one that had been growing inside her since she noticed the fake signature since they padlocked the refrigerator. Since they tried to send her to the psychiatric hospital, she picked up one of the destroyed letters. It was the shortest one. One Frank had written to her after their first wedding anniversary. It could no longer be read completely. The drops of water and dirt had washed away the words. Only 2 clear lines remained. I didn't know how to love until I saw you doing the dishes and singing." Miss Carroll pressed it against her chest as if she could still save something. "Who was it?" she murmured through clenched teeth, getting up slowly. "Who dared?" Rose arrived shortly after, alerted by Tony, who had seen her from the back window inside the house. "Carol," Rose whispered, seeing her with wet shoes and hands full of mud. "What happened?" Carol didn't say anything. She just pointed to the box. "Was this here last night?" Rose asked. "Yes, closed, locked, and the key. I have it in my bra. No one took it from me." Rose immediately understood. They didn't force the box. They moved the whole thing. Someone with access took it out while everyone was sleeping or while Carol wasn't paying attention, and it wasn't just anyone. At noon, Carol gathered her strength and went up to Frank's room again. Since her husband's death, that room had been more of a sanctuary than a bedroom. But now she felt it was different. Something was wrong. She walked toward the dresser, the same one where she had discovered the false compartment weeks ago, and stopped. She touched it with her fingertips. The wood was not the same. The old pine that Frank had bought at the flea market had a unique texture, rough with twisted grain and a poorly sanded edge on the right side. But this dresser didn't have that detail. The corner was smooth, too smooth. She knelt down with difficulty. She hit the base 3 times before it sounded hollow. Now it didn't. The furniture had been changed. She knew it immediately, and then she remembered something. 3 weeks ago, Grace had said that a friend of hers had done her a favor by taking away an old piece of furniture and bringing another. According to her, the previous one was infested with termites. Carol hadn't questioned anything at the time. She was sick. She had a fever. She could barely move. But now, everything made sense. The missing letters, the sealed compartment, the flat bottom, the disappearance of the black notebook. "You knew!" she suddenly yelled, not caring who heard her. Grace ran up the stairs. "What's wrong now?" "You changed it. You changed the dresser. You took what was inside. You're talking nonsense again, Mom. Don't talk to me like that. I'm not crazy. You had it taken out. You found your father's letters. You wet them. You destroyed them. And what are you talking about?" "Some old letters. Worthless papers." Worthless? They were his emotional will. They were the only sincere words he left me when he already knew he was going to die. Grace looked at her for a second. For the first time in weeks, she lowered her gaze. She bit her lips, but instead of apologizing, she defended herself. "I just wanted things not to get more complicated. You clung to that paper as if it were a Bible, as if it was worth more than your own children. Because you erased me. You treated me like an old rag, and now you want to cleanse your sins by burning the only thing I had left of him. Stop it, Mom. Stop acting like you're the only victim." "And what am I then, Grace? A burden? A stone in your path? A crazy old woman who gets in the way of family photos?" Grace didn't answer. She just left. She slammed the door harder than necessary. Carol let herself fall onto the bed. She was breathing heavily. The tears didn't come out. Not anymore. The pain was dry, silent, deep. The kind of pain that doesn't ask for comfort, but for justice. She went downstairs. She locked herself in her room. She took out Frank's original envelope, the will, the declarations, the photos that could still be saved. She made a decision. That same afternoon, she would go with Rose to the courthouse. She would request a legal protection order. She would initiate a formal eviction process. But when she looked out the window, she saw something that stopped her cold. A black car, new, parked right in front of her. And inside the car, a face she knew well. The same face that years ago was in a photograph with Frank the day they signed the original deed to the lot. The man got out of the car. He was wearing a suit. He was carrying a briefcase, and he hadn't come by chance. Carol didn't move. She watched the man get out of the black car with studied slowness, as if he knew that every step he took had weight. He was wearing a dark suit, a perfectly knotted tie, polished shoes. The briefcase in his right hand hung as if it contained a sentence. He was not a stranger. Carol recognized him instantly. That face, that very face, appeared in one of the photographs Frank had kept in the black notebook. He was the young lawyer who 30 years ago had processed the original purchase of the lot where the house was built. His name, although she had barely heard it in life, now sounded clear in her memory. Attorney Matthew Oliveira. The door opened without anyone calling. Grace, with her hair combed and makeup on, came out to the foyer, feigning nonchalance. "Attorney, it's a pleasure to see you again. Please come in." "Thank you," the man replied without a smile. Miss Carol came down from the second-floor hallway. Her voice broke the air. "And what do you want to negotiate now without me?" Grace turned to look at her, uncomfortable. "Mom, don't make a scene. It's just a legal consultation." "Consultation?" Carol asked, coming down each step with the firmness of someone who is no longer willing to be silent. "With the same lawyer who signed my papers with Frank 3 decades ago." Matthew looked at her and nodded with respect. "Miss Carol, it's a pleasure to see you again. You don't remember me, but I remember you well. You and your husband signed the original deed with me at the notary's office 84. He was a very cautious man. "And rightly so," she replied. "If you only knew how it all ended." The lawyer didn't say anything. Carol crossed the room and sat in her armchair. She faced the man without fear. "Why did you come, attorney?" "Mom, I was hired to review documentations that supposedly contradicts the will your husband left. But upon reading everything they gave me, I must tell you something very clearly." There was a silence. "This case has no legal way to favor your children." Grace stood up. "What do you mean, no? My mother is being manipulated. That woman, Rose, has filled her head with ideas. She has forged papers." My mother is confused. Matthew turned to her calmly. "Miss Grace, the document your mother possesses is legitimate. Your father signed it. It's notarized, registered, and also supported by witness evidence. I have seen many family disputes, but rarely do I see as much legal clarity as in this case. But that house was built for us." "It's ours!" Stephen yelled from the kitchen. Matthew raised his voice just a notch. "I'm sorry, sir. Legally, it belongs to your mother, and if she decides to change the locks, kick you out, or leave the house to whoever she wants, she is fully within her rights." Carol looked at him with narrowed eyes. "So, you are on my side. I am on the side of the law, Mom, and the law is on your side." Grace went straight to the hallway. A door slamming shut was heard moments later. Stephen remained there with his arms crossed, his eyes filled with a rage he could no longer contain. Carol stood up. She walked to a shelf and took down a framed photo of Frank, young with his arms crossed in front of the house when it was barely a concrete shell. She showed it to Matthew. "Do you know what hurts the most? That he saw it coming? That he anticipated it? That he wrote down everything that is happening today in his own hand, but I couldn't read it while he was alive." Matthew lowered his gaze. "Your husband left me a letter before he died. He asked me only to deliver it if this house ever became a source of dispute." Carol stopped. "A letter?" "Yes. I brought it with me." He took the envelope out of his briefcase. "I know I should have given it to you sooner, but I hoped I would never have to." He handed her the envelope. She took it with hands that now truly trembled. She opened it. It was a short letter written in a firm hand. "If this paper is in Matthew's hands, it's because what I feared most came true. Carol, don't cry for them anymore. Don't seek their forgiveness if they never apologize to you. Don't beg for affection where there is no love left. This house is yours, as was my respect for you. Do with it what you want, but never let them take away what you built with your hands." Your husband, Frank. Carol closed the envelope. She didn't say anything. It wasn't necessary. That same night, Rose went to see her. Carol told her everything. The visit, the letter, the lawyer's support. Rose hugged her. She cried for her. But then a noise interrupted that moment. A dry, loud, metallic bang came from the main gate. Carol and Rose ran to the door. And there, under the street lamp on the sidewalk, something was thrown. A black trash bag open. And inside the wet letter envelope, Frank's photos and a torn notebook. Everything they had stolen. Now they were returning it like this, as if it were garbage. And next to the bag, a note written in red marker. You won with papers, but we haven't lost yet. Rose knelt down first. She took the black bag with both hands while Carol held the note. The paper was thick like cheap cardboard and smelled acid from the freshly used red marker. The ink had bled through to the back. The message was clear, short, cowardly, but effective. You won with papers, but we haven't lost yet. Carol read the sentence 3 times. It didn't need a signature. It didn't need an explanation. She knew perfectly well where it came from. That was Stephen's handwriting. He had written that without a doubt. Not with his hand, perhaps, but with the twisted heart he had left. And Grace surely celebrated it in silence from her room. This has gotten out of hand, Rose murmured, looking with pain at the wet photos, the torn corners, the notebook with the pages ripped out abruptly. Carol, you can't let it go. They're not just insulting you, they're pushing you. They want you to snap. Yes, that's what they want. For me to react. For me to lose my temper. For me to yell so they can film me and say, look how the lady is. She's no longer rational, but I won't give it to them. Then what are you going to do? Carol didn't answer. She walked into the house without saying a single word, went up to Frank's room with the bag and left it on the desk. Then she took out the letter that Attorney Oliveira had given her, placed it on the nightstand, and lit a candle. She sat in the chair her husband used to occupy and for a moment imagined his voice. This is not for revenge, Carol. It's for you so they don't keep silencing you, so you don't end your days begging for respect in your own house. That night, Stephen didn't return. Grace came down once, opened the pantry, took out a can of tuna, and locked herself away again. Tony appeared for a few minutes, asked Carol for an aspirin, and locked himself away again, too. The atmosphere inside the house became a minefield. No one trusted anyone. The hallways tasted of tension. The doors of mistrust. At dawn, Carol got up with the first rays of the sun. She put water on to heat in the enamel pot, prepared coffee with cinnamon and brown sugar, cut hard bread into slices, and went out to the patio. She placed everything on the stone table that Frank had built next to the lemon tree. Rose arrived on time. She was carrying a plastic folder in her hand. Ready, Carol said without hesitation. Attorney Ramirez already filed the eviction request, but he told me that the ideal thing would be for you to make it public before they accuse you of anything else. Public? Yes. For you yourself to inform your children with witnesses, with a lawyer present, not for them to find out from a paper glued to the door, for them to find out face to face. And what if they attack me? I'll be there. And the attorney too. And what if they say I want to leave them homeless? You're not leaving them. They left on their own. Carol took a deep breath. Then, let's do it. That same afternoon, after lunch, Attorney Ramirez arrived at the house accompanied by an assistant. He carried a briefcase with the documents already signed by the court. The eviction was in process and it was a matter of days. But first, he said, I want you, ma'am, to read this out loud to them. It must be clear that your decision is not a sudden one. It's for years of Kita's, of abandonment, abuse, and contempt. Carol took the sheet. It was a brief text written with the heart, but with legal advice, a letter of dignity, not of hatred. Grace and Stephen were called to the living room. Tony came down on his own. He sat in a corner without speaking. Rose was there, silent but recording everything on her cell phone with Carol's permission. Carol stood up. Her voice was firm, her back straight. I, Carol Baker, declare that this house is not for sale, is not in dispute, and belongs only to me, and that you, my children, no longer have any right over it, not by law, not by blood, but by your actions. Grace crossed her arms. Stephen gave the lawyer a sharp look. This is a trap, he said. No, this is a consequence. Carol corrected, and she continued reading. For years I tolerated contempt, mockery, insults, hunger, padlocks, confinement, lies, forgery, shouting, table banging, doors slamming, all in silence. But today, with these documents, with the law on my side, and with a clean conscience, I tell you it's over. You have no right to this, Grace yelled, standing up. Frank would never do this. Frank wrote every word that stripped you of the right to call yourselves heirs, and you know it. Rose manipulated you. She insisted. You are no longer thinking clearly. Carol took a step closer. I am thinking so clearly that I finally realized that what you wanted from me was not love. It was the will. No one responded. You have 1 week to leave. If you don't, the judge will order it. But if you leave before then without fighting anymore, I will not expose you. I will not humiliate you. I will not show the videos or the papers or the letters. I will keep my dignity for myself, and I leave you a final opportunity to save yours. She turned around, went up the stairs, and before closing her bedroom door, she turned round just once. You didn't fail me because you were poor. You failed me because you were wicked. That night, the house didn't sleep. Grace packed her suitcases secretly. Stephen made 2 calls, one to a private number, the other to someone who answered with a trembling voice. And Tony. Tony remained sitting on the patio alone with his head in his hands, because although everyone knew the end was approaching, none of them imagined what was going to happen before it arrived. Tony didn't sleep that night, not because of noise, nor because of guilt. He didn't sleep because for the first time he understood that the silence he had chosen for years no longer protected him. It condemned him. He stayed on the patio until the sun came up, his gaze fixed on the loose tiles and his feet cold. At times he closed his eyes and saw his mother's face the day before, reading them that letter as if she were reading them their expulsion decree from heaven. He didn't shout, he didn't fight, he didn't insult, but he didn't defend either. And that was his true mistake. Inside the house, Grace had spent the early morning packing the few things she had left. Shoes, creams, documents that wouldn't do her any good. She did it with stiff movements, like someone not packing things, but rage. Stephen was not there. He had left in the early morning without saying where. He called a private number from the street and didn't return. Carol from her room heard him leave. She didn't stop him. Rose arrived early as she did every morning. You look better this morning, she told Carol, serving her peppermint tea. I slept like I haven't slept in years without fear of them knocking on the door with threats or checking my drawers while I'm at church. Do you think they will leave peacefully? I don't know, but if they don't, I'm already prepared for what's coming. Rose placed an envelope on the table. Here is the complaint that the lawyer drafted for the destruction of your personal documents, if you decide to sign it. It will be delivered tomorrow, but it's your decision. Carol looked at the envelope. She didn't touch it. I want to wait 1 more day to see if they have any shame left. At 11 o'clock in the morning, Grace came down with 2 suitcases. Her makeup was intact as if she were going to a party, but her eyes didn't lie. Tony approached her. Where are you going? What do you care? And Stephen, and you? Are you going to stay here as if nothing happened? It's not nothing, Grace. She's our mother. No, our mother left years ago. All that's left here is a spiteful woman and a nosy neighbor who brainwashed her. Tony didn't answer. "Do what you want," she said, leaving without looking back. Rose watched from the window. "One less," she murmured, but Carol didn't celebrate. She just sighed. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the front gate slammed again, this time with violence. 3 hard, dry knocks with a closed fist. Carol stood up. She opened it without fear. It was Stephen. He was wearing a wrinkled shirt, no tie, and his eyes were blazing. "I want to talk to you," he said. "Come in," Carol replied. He entered without greeting anyone, without looking at Rose. He went straight to the dining room. Carol sat across from him. "Tell me." "I'm not going to apologize because I don't care if you forgive me. Then don't waste your time. I just came to tell you that we are not leaving. Not today, not tomorrow, not next week. And if the judge comes, I'll tell him the same thing, that we built this house together, that we've lived here since we were children, that you are mentally unstable, that you are being manipulated. And what do you expect to happen? For me to listen to you one last time because if you want war, you'll have war." "No, I don't want war, Stephen, but I'm not going to let myself be crushed either. Then be ready." He stood up, and before leaving, he left a key on the table. Carol recognized it immediately. It was the key to the original dresser, the one she had lost years ago, the one someone had quietly taken from her. The same one that opened the false bottom where Frank hid what hurt him the most. "What is this? I left it there so you know that I keep things too, and I'm not afraid to open them if necessary." He left. Carol remained with the key in her hand. She squeezed it. She didn't say anything. But that night when she went to bed, she put the key under her pillow. And she knew that Stephen wasn't just talking about secrets. He was talking about something more. And what Carol didn't know was that that same night, Stephen would secretly enter Mr. Johnson's house because a copy of the will was still there and he was willing to destroy everything to avoid losing. The early morning slid over Phoenix like a frozen sigh. The neighborhood was quiet, asleep, as if the city had stopped for a few hours. But in Mr. Johnson's house, a different silence lingered. One that didn't have peace, but threat. At 3:16 in the morning, someone forced the padlock on the back gate. There was no need to break it. He had the key. He had lived in that house years ago when he was still a child, and Mr. Johnson would lend him the hose to wash his bicycle. He knew every corner. Stephen entered with a flashlight in hand and leather gloves. The yellow light barely illuminated the worn walls of the hallway. He walked slowly without making a sound until he reached the door of Mr. Johnson's workshop. He knew that he slept soundly with medication since he suffered the fall on his leg. Frank had told him in his last days, "Mr. Johnson sleeps like a rock when he takes his drops," he had said, and Stephen remembered everything. He forced the lock on the large piece of furniture where, according to what Carol had said out loud days earlier, a copy of the will was located. He searched, rummaged, opened boxes, kicked cans, tore up envelopes, and there, in an old folded folder with faded letters, he found what he feared most, but also what he needed: a legalized copy of the original will, a sheet with seals, signatures, and a declaration signed by Mr. Johnson himself, confirming that Frank had personally given him the document for safekeeping. Stephen stared at that paper as if it were dynamite. He read it from top to bottom, and what he saw finished breaking him. There, in large, clearly legible letters, it specified that the property would, upon Carol's death, be in the name of a person who had demonstrated constant companionship and care. And next to that paragraph, an underlined name, Rose Carter. His blood ran cold. He knew that Carol had already said it. He knew it was probable. But reading it, seeing it in writing was something else. He didn't think twice. He walked over to the patio stove. He took a lighter out of his pocket and lit the flame. He put the papers between the rusty grates and let the fire turn them into ash one by one. When he finished, he collected the ashes with a broom and threw them down the drain. And before leaving, he arranged everything as it was. Not a sound, not a witness. At 7 in the morning, Mr. Johnson woke up with difficulty. His hip hurt. He dragged himself with his cane to the workshop. Something wasn't right. The books were misplaced. Envelopes were missing. He opened the wooden box where he kept Frank's will. Empty. "No," he murmured. He looked everywhere. He rummaged through drawers, but it was no longer there. He went out into the street as best he could. He knocked on Carol's door. Rose opened it. "Carol, something happened." Carol approached, worried. "What?" "The will. The copy. The one Frank gave me. Someone took it." "How do you mean took it? It's not there. And I didn't open that door. No one has a key but you and Stephen." Rose leaned forward. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely sure. It was there last night. This morning it's not." Carol didn't say anything. She just looked out at the street, and she knew. Mid-morning, Stephen entered the house with a coffee in his hand as if nothing had happened. "Good morning, Mom." Carol looked at him from the dining room. "Did you sleep well? Like a king? And what did you dream about? That everything was going back to the way it was before what? Before you let a stranger turn you against your children." Carol watched him for a few seconds. Then she calmly got up and put the original will folder in front of him, the one that was still in her possession, the one signed by the notary and sealed. "Are you sure everything is still the same?" "More than ever," he replied without blinking. "And what would you do if I told you that the law is no longer on your side?" "I would tell the law that it better not interfere where it's not wanted." That afternoon, Carol and Rose went to see Attorney Ramirez. They told him about the disappearance of the document at Mr. Johnson's house. He listened to everything in silence. Then he opened a folder. "Don't worry. The copy I have in this office is valid, and the original, the real one, is already in the custody of the court." Carol sighed. "Thank you." Ramirez closed the folder and looked at them seriously. "But I warn you, what happened last night is serious." Stephen crossed a line. "We know," Rose said, "only now he won't get away clean. Then we have to act because they won't stop fighting, and I'm afraid what follows will be their last move." "What do you mean?" Carol asked. The lawyer paused. "Rumors travel fast. I was informed an hour ago that someone is trying to register a falsified power of attorney in your name at another notary's office." "What?" "Yes. If they manage to present it as valid, they can make it look like you authorized the sale of the house." Carol put her hand to her chest. "Another forgery." "Yes." "And this time, they are going all out." Carol took a deep breath. She closed her eyes. "Then there is no other option." "What?" "We are going to confront them once and for all, but this time in front of the judge because dignity is not begged for. It is defended." And she was ready, even though her children still didn't know that this story was no longer being written by them. The court date was set for Friday at 9 o'clock sharp in the morning. Courtroom number 4 of the family court in downtown Chicago. Rose arrived early. She was dressed simply but with firmness. A white blouse carefully ironed and a dark blue skirt that she only wore for important occasions. In her purse, she carried copies of everything: the will, the Johnsons' declarations, evidence of the forced eviction attempt, photos of the vandalized gate, the threat note, everything. Miss Carol, on the other hand, didn't arrive in elegant clothes. She arrived with her dignity. She wore the same navy blue dress that Frank bought her for her first grandson's baptism, the same one she later kept in the back of the dresser where he hid his papers. She braided her hair and put on her black patent leather shoes, the ones she wore when she went to church on Sundays, not to impress, but to honor her history. Attorney Ramirez was already waiting for them in the hallway. His face was serious as always, but that morning there was something different in his gaze. Perhaps because he knew that they were not just facing a case, but closing a story marked by abandonment, manipulation, and silent pain. On the other side of the hallway, Stephen arrived 10 minutes late. He carried his jacket slung over his shoulder, an unironed shirt, and glassy eyes from pretending to be composed. Behind him, Grace, with dark glasses, loose hair, and a notebook in her hand that she hadn't let go of since she got out of the taxi. She avoided looking at her mother. Tony didn't arrive. The courtroom was smaller than Carol imagined. A cold space with wooden benches and a raised platform where the judge, a young woman with a firm face, was already quickly looking through the file. Case number 497. Is a family member missing? Tony couldn't make it, Stephen said. He will be considered absent, the judge replied. We begin. The first 2 hours were technical. Attorney Ramirez presented documents, a timeline of events, proof of manipulation, and above all, Frank's original will with certified signatures, dates, and the notarial endorsement of Attorney Ulver. Stephen tried to interrupt several times. He said his mother had changed since she became friends with Rose. He said she suffered from memory lapses, that she couldn't remember basic things. Grace declared that her mother was no longer the same, that someone was manipulating her, that she was confused, that everything that was happening was a family misunderstanding. But then Ramirez requested authorization to play a video. The judge agreed, and on the courtroom screen, the recording of the day Carol read the letter to her children was projected for everyone to see. The camera was fixed on her face, on her voice, on her contained trembling, on her firm gaze. She was heard without a single hesitation. Grace gripped the notebook in her hands. Stephen lowered his head. When the video ended, the judge remained silent. She flipped through the pages one more time. Then she addressed Carol. Miss Carol, do you have anything to say? Carol slowly stood up. She walked to the microphone. I'm not going to say much because I already said everything in my house. I just want you to listen to me as a mother, as a woman, and as a human being. She took a deep breath. They didn't hit me with their hands. They hit me with silence, with contempt, with hunger, with indifference. And when I tried to speak, they tried to lock me up. When I presented my papers, they called me crazy. When I defended what was mine, they threw my husband's photos in the trash. Her voice broke. I don't wish them ill, but I also don't want them near me. And if that makes me a bad mother, then I prefer to be that than to continue being a victim. The judge remained silent. Thank you for your honesty, Miss Carol. The hearing ended at 12:47 in the afternoon. The judge retired without issuing a ruling. She would take 72 hours to dictate a sentence. But everyone in the courtroom already knew the truth. Stephen left without speaking to anyone. Grace, at the end of the hallway, turned around for a moment. She looked at her mother from afar, but Carol didn't look back because there was nothing left to look at, only dignity to reclaim. As night fell, Rose prepared tea for Carol. They were sitting on the patio next to the lemon tree. The house was silent. What if we don't win? Rose asked with fear in her eyes. I already won, Carol said. Because for the first time, I don't feel alone anymore. And you want us to cancel the hearing? Yes, Stephen replied. And if we can't, I want everything that woman presented to be invalidated. Are you willing to do whatever it takes? Stephen didn't hesitate. Whatever it takes, even if it's the last thing I do. And in his briefcase, he was already carrying the papers for a sale that Carol had never authorized. Sunday dawned with a gray sky. The clouds hung heavy over Phoenix as if they also knew what was about to happen in Ms. Carroll's house. Everything was silent, but not peaceful. A thick, heavy silence like that of a storm held in the air before it breaks. Rose arrived at 7 o'clock with sweet cornbread wrapped in a cloth napkin. Did you sleep? She asked upon entering. No, but that doesn't tire me like before. I'm ready, Rose. For what? For anything, because today I'm not closing the door. Rose looked at her with worry, but didn't argue. She knew that when Carol spoke like that, there was no turning back. At 9:15, Stephen appeared. He didn't knock on the door. He didn't say hello. He entered as if he still had the right. He was carrying a backpack over his shoulder and a hard gaze, one of those that only someone who has already crossed a line and doesn't plan to go back has. "What are you doing here?" Carol asked from the dining room. "I came to stay." "You have an eviction order in process." "The final resolution hasn't come out, so legally I'm still your son, and this house is also mine." "No, this house was never yours, neither on paper nor in love." Stephen left the backpack in the entrance. He walked straight to the back room. "You're not going to kick me out, Mom, neither you nor your neighbor." "No one is kicking you out here. You're just pushing yourself away step by step." At noon, Carol went to the kitchen. She started preparing rice with vegetables, whatever she had. Rose was helping her chop onions when they heard the door slam. Grace had just arrived. "Oh, so there is food now," she said mockingly, throwing her purse onto the table. "What a miracle that you can afford to eat now." Carol didn't answer. She poured her a glass of water and went back to what she was doing. Grace wandered through the house as if she were an annoyed visitor. She criticized the dry flower pots, the dust in the entrance, the cracked mirror in the bathroom. She walked with her arms crossed and that air of superiority that had always followed her. At 2:00, everyone sat down at the table. Rose, Carol, Tony, who had come down in silence, and the two siblings. The table seemed narrower, the glances sharper than knives. "And when are you planning to leave, Mom?" Stephen suddenly asked. "Because everything you're doing is just prolonging the inevitable." "What is the inevitable?" Carol asked, serving herself rice. "That you're not going to win. Even if you have for now, this is not over." "And why not?" "What's missing? Something is always missing, and you know it." Carol looked at him calmly. "I'm not afraid of losing, son. But you are afraid that someone will finally tell you the truth to your face, that you deserve nothing." Grace stood up abruptly. "That's enough. Now you're going to lecture us after doing all this, after putting us on blast as if we were criminals. I didn't put you on blast. I just gave you the opportunity to show yourselves for who you really are. And you didn't waste it." Tony lowered his head. He wasn't eating. He just pushed the rice around with his fork. "You were never a mother, Mom. You were always a martyr. And now you love seeing yourself as a victim." Grace spat out. Rose stood up. "You have no right to talk to her like that, not after everything you did to her." "And you? You are nobody here. I am more family to her than you are." "Of course. That's why she's going to leave you the house, right?" Grace laughed. "Well played, Rose. You earned it. Humiliating us, dividing us, feeding all this hatred." Carol stood up. "I fed myself, Grace. You didn't even give me that. And don't come to me with fake guilt. This is no longer about the house. It's about everything you destroyed without realizing it." Stephen stared at her. "You're kicking us out, aren't you?" "No, you already left. You just came back for the scraps." Silence. Only the clinking of a spoon against Tony's plate could be heard. That night, Carol locked herself in her room with a straight back. She had eaten little for dinner, but her stomach and soul were firm. She looked at the open Bible on the nightstand, the same one where Frank hid his first letter. And there inside she found something she didn't remember putting there. A folded piece of paper, a handwritten note in shaky handwriting, but familiar. "Mom, I don't know how to reach you without breaking myself, but if you don't wake up tomorrow, I want you to know that everything I did hurts me. I don't know how to fix it. I just wanted to tell you that even though I came late, I'm still here, Tony." Carol read it slowly, and for the first time in many days, she cried in silence. But on the other side of the house, Stephen was preparing something else. His lawyer had found a corrupt judge, one willing to register Carol's falsified signature as valid. And the next day, the house would legally appear in the hands of a phantom buyer, A man without a face, with dirty money and clear orders to get Carol out, even if it meant violence. It dawned with a thick heat, the kind that gives no truce to the shadow or the soul. Ms. Carroll woke up before the rooster crowed. She had dreamed of Frank. Not like other times where he appeared young, smiling, and hard-working. This time, she saw him serious. He spoke to her without a voice from a bench in the park where they used to walk. Carol approached, but he only looked at her with sadness, as if trying to warn her of something she still didn't understand. When she opened her eyes, her forehead was soaked with sweat. She went out to the patio, watered the dry flower pots that she refused to throw away, and sat under the lemon tree. She was restless. Tony came down shortly after. His eyes were red, but not from lack of sleep. He had cried. Carol knew it. She felt it since the night before when she read the note hidden between the pages of the Bible. She still hadn't said anything to him, but she didn't need to. "Do you want coffee?" he asked. "Only if it's with sugar, not with guilt." Tony managed a forced smile. "Then I'll make it now," he replied, lowering his gaze. At 10:40, an official notification arrived. A man from the court in a beige vest and dark glasses knocked on the door and handed over a sealed envelope. He didn't say another word. He just asked for a signature and left. Rose read it with Carol. "This doesn't make sense," she said, reading again. "It says here that according to the property registry system, the deed of sale for the house has already been updated." "What?" "It says here that there was a signature of yours authorizing the sale of the property to a real estate company, that there is already an active transfer process, that you were the one who signed it 3 days ago." "But I haven't signed anything." Rose looked at her horrified. "It's a forgery. Another one. And this one? It's already in the official system. Stephen did it." Carol sat down abruptly. "What do? We go to Attorney Ramirez's office now. This has gotten out of hand." When they arrived, the lawyer received them urgently. He read the notification line by line until he let out a contained puff of air. They did it. They found someone inside the system, a judge, a registrar, a corrupt person who accepted the deed as valid. "And what does that mean?" Rose asked. "That on paper right now, the house no longer appears in Carol's name. It appears in the name of a shell company. And if we don't stop this today, tomorrow they could arrive with an eviction order backed by that adulterated document." "Can it be stopped?" "Yes, but it won't be easy. We need an urgent hearing and clear proof that you, Carol, never signed that paper. I have my real signature on all my documents. The will, the letters, the old IDs, everything. It's not enough if they presented a falsified signature on physical paper. But with judicial backing, we have to prove that the person who endorsed it was part of the fraud. What if we show the video the day they tried to make her sign? We will use it, and I will ask for the supposed buyer to testify because that company does not exist. It is a front, and there is someone with a name behind it." In the afternoon, Carol returned home with Rose, but they didn't enter as before. Outside, in front of the gate, a white pickup truck was parked. Tinted windows, unidentifiable plates, a man in a hat and black shirt was smoking, leaning against the hood. "Do you know him?" Rose asked. "I've never seen him. He's not from the neighborhood." They walked cautiously. The man didn't move, but he followed Carol with his eyes until she entered and locked the door with a double turn. Inside, Stephen was sitting in the living room, legs crossed, cell phone in hand. "Why is that guy here?" Carol asked directly. "What guy?" "The one outside who looks like a thug." "I don't know what you're talking about. Does he have something to do with the fake sale?" "What fake sale?" he replied sarcastically. "Mom, you already signed. Don't you remember?" Carol took a step forward. She stood right in front of him. "Look into my eyes, Stephen. Do you think I'm going to let you finish what you started?" "That you're going to kick me out of here like a crazy woman after everything you've done to me?" You're going to leave on your own? He said, putting away his cell phone. What's coming? You won't be able to stop it anymore. Rose approached him. What's coming? Do you think the law will always be on your side? He laughed. There are laws and there are arrangements, says. And what do you think will happen when all this comes to light? Nothing, because when all this explodes, you won't be here anymore. Carol felt a shiver. Stephen went up the stairs as if he hadn't just spat venom, and then Rose touched Carol's arm. We have to move now. Where? Somewhere safe. You can't sleep here tonight. Not while he's willing to do anything. Carol pressed her lips together. She looked at the house, the walls, the photos hanging up, Frank's old armchair, the hallway lamp. Every corner was her life. I'm not leaving. Carol, please, I'm not leaving. If they take me out, they will have to drag me. But I'm not leaving. Rose swallowed. Then we both stay. But tonight, we're going to barricade everything, and we're going to pray that justice arrives before them. But elsewhere, in the darkness of an unnamed office, a fake judge had already signed the final eviction order, and a bailiff had already been assigned to execute it. Monday, 8:30 in the morning, Rose checked for the 5th time that the door bolt was firm. She pushed it, pulled it, and then turned the iron bar 3 times. The front door was also secured, the back patio gate reinforced with chains, the windows closed with wood from the inside. The doorbell no longer rang. Carol had disconnected it 2 nights ago. Everything was tied up, sealed, but fear didn't understand padlocks. Carol in the kitchen stirred the oatmeal in silence. Her eyes were swollen, not from insomnia, but from what she already anticipated. She knew today was the day that something would move. That something or someone was going to touch the house in a way she couldn't ignore. Are you eating? Rose asked, bringing her the plate closer. I'm not hungry. Didn't you even try? Carol didn't answer. Her hands were on the plastic tablecloth with faded flowers. Her nails were broken, her veins exposed. It was a sad image, but also a firm one. The lawyer said we would know today if the corrupt judge managed to move something. Rose insisted. We shouldn't assume the worst. Maybe they won't dare. What if they're no longer afraid? Then the legal blow will hurt when it falls. And what if before the legal blow they want to give me a physical one? Rose didn't know what to say. At 9:20, the first knock sounded. It wasn't on the door. It was on the gate 3 times with a metal object. It wasn't a doorbell. It was a warning. Carol stood up with difficulty. Rose caught up with her in the living room. They didn't open. Who is it? Carol asked in a loud voice from inside. Silence. And then a man spoke. It wasn't Stephen. It wasn't Tony. It wasn't any neighbor. I'm here by court order to execute immediate eviction of the property for signed transfer of ownership. Sealed document. Bailiff with legal faculties. Rose felt her stomach drop. There is no valid order. This property is protected, she replied from inside. We are not here to debate. We have authorization to enter by force if you don't cooperate. Then show the order, Carol yelled. Through the slot. Legally. You must deliver before entering. A second of silence. Then an envelope slipped under the door. Rose picked it up. She opened it. She read it quickly. It's fake. The judge's signature is digitally altered and the file number doesn't even match. And what if they enter anyway? Carol whispered. Then let them enter. But you stay behind me. Then from the street, another voice shouted, Rose, Miss Carol! It was Tony's voice. They both approached the window. Tony was running on the sidewalk, agitated, phone in hand. Don't open. Don't let them in. The lawyer already filed the criminal complaint against the judge and the fake real estate company. The emergency suspension is already active. Carol shouted to the fake bailiff from inside. You've already been reported. If you cross that door, you'll end up handcuffed. Silence returned and then footsteps. 1, 2, 3. The white pickup truck started up at full speed and left without further ado. Carol didn't move. She stood next to the door, her forehead sweating, her legs trembling, but standing. "Did they leave?" Rose asked. "This time, yes. And next time they won't knock on the door. They'll use other hands." That night, the whole neighborhood was talking. Neighbors who pretended not to see now peered from their windows. Others crossed the sidewalk with quick steps. And some, like Ms. Pat from the store, approached only to say in a low voice, "Be careful, Carol, because when justice doesn't serve them." There are those who use other kinds of people. And Carol understood what was coming was not legal. It was personal, and the personal sometimes arrives with a covered face and other times with the very face of your own son. The next day dawned with the tense calm that can only exist when danger has already knocked on the door, and it still doesn't know if it will return. Carol opened her bedroom window carefully. Outside, the air was thick, windless. Even the neighborhood dogs weren't barking. It was as if the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Rose was sleeping in the guest room. She didn't want to leave that night. She insisted on staying, and Carol didn't argue with her. Something inside her told her she shouldn't be alone, and she was silently grateful. Breakfast was silent, but with a taste of resistance. French toast, cinnamon coffee, and refried beans, like the ones Frank used to prepare when he wanted to cheer her up after a difficult week. Carol ate slowly. Rose with her eyes wide open as if waiting for a sign of something she still didn't understand. "They won't come today," Carol said suddenly. "Why are you so sure?" "Because last night they already lost. What did they lose? Fear. And when someone loses fear, all that's left is desperation. And desperation, Rose doesn't think, it just acts." At 10:15, Carol was checking an old box of memories that she had kept under the bed. Inside, she found something she didn't expect. A broken hardcover Ver planner. On the first page, written in blue ink, it said, "Frank Baker, 1991. Only for what should not be forgotten." She flipped through the pages. They were full of notes, payments, phone numbers, homemade recipes, but in the middle, a sheet folded several times was hidden between two pages. She unfolded it with trembling hands. It was a letter, but it was not addressed to her. It was addressed to Stephen. "Son, I know you won't understand this today, but I want you to know something I never dared to tell you face to face. The land where we built the house was not a gift. It was not an inheritance. It was a loan that was given to us with one condition, that it would never be sold, that it would stay in the family. And you showed ambition from a young age, not to build, but to own. I saw it when you were 14 and you hid the deeds in the closet. I saw it when you cried, not because of the scolding, but because you couldn't change your name on the papers. Son, I failed you as a father by not correcting you in time, but I will not leave you the house because I would not leave anyone an inheritance that they will only use to erase me." Carol felt a lump in her throat. It was the first time she had seen Frank write with such clarity, without detours, without embellishments, as if he already knew he wouldn't be there to say it out loud. "What is that?" Rose asked from the doorway. Carol handed her the sheet. Rose read it in silence. Did Stephen know this? No, but that's why all the hatred, because he always knew deep down that his father didn't trust him. "Are you going to show this to the judge?" "No, this letter is not for the judge. It is for Tony." That same afternoon, Carol sat with Tony on the patio. She handed him the letter without saying a word. He read it with a frown, biting his lower lip. When he finished, he folded it carefully and held it in his hands. "Why are you giving it to me?" "Because you still have time, son, not to be like them, and because I want you to know that your father also saw something different in you. You were silent a lot, but you didn't destroy." Tony pressed the sheet against his chest, his eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know how to help you, Mom. And I didn't know how to ask, son. They hugged. They cried. But it was a cry that didn't break, but united. But while bonds were being restored in that patio, elsewhere, Grace was planning her final move. She was sitting in a downtown cafe with her cell phone in her hand. Across from her, the same lawyer Stephen had hired days before. So there's no longer any way to annul the will? No. With everything that has come to light, if we try, we'll sink further. And what if the evidence disappears? It's no longer a single piece. There are legal copies, digital backups, witnesses. Everything is documented. Grace remained silent. Then, have we lost? The lawyer looked at her. It depends on what you are willing to do because there is something you know and haven't said yet. Grace tensed up. What are you referring to that afternoon when Frank fell on the patio? You said it was an accident, but I know your mother didn't entirely believe you. Grace lowered her gaze. It was a push. Small, impulsive. I didn't mean to, but it happened. And if someone else finds out? Grace interrupted him with a whisper. No one is going to know anymore because if any of this leaks, I can talk too. About what? About what Stephen forced me to sign. About the hidden accounts and about what's about to happen this week. The lawyer remained silent. What is going to happen this week, Grace? She smiled with her mouth, but not with her eyes. Nothing legal, but definitive. And that same night, in an office on the outskirts of Phoenix, a sheet was signed by a buyer with a false identity and Ms. Carol's name was removed from the system for the last time, at least for a few hours. Wednesday dawned as if nothing had happened. The trucks sounded the same. The church bells continued to mark the hour, and the neighbors swept their sidewalks with palm brooms as they did every morning. But inside Ms. Carol's house, it was not an ordinary day. It was the day Rose had waited for in silence, the day Carol had imagined on so many sleepless nights, and the day Stephen and Grace failed to stop because they believed they still had time. At 9:15, a gray car with the logos of the State Judicial Branch of Arizona parked in front of the house. Two men got out with folders in their hands, one of them with glasses hanging from his neck, and an attitude that left no room for doubt. What they brought was not a notice. It was execution. Attorney Ramirez, the taller one asked upon reaching the foyer. Present, the lawyer replied from the other side. We are ready. Ms. Carol was already dressed, not in formal wear, but in history. She wore her brown linen dress, the one she had worn to Frank's funeral, with the buttons firm and her heart calm. Are you sure? Rose asked her one last time. Yes, they won't break me today. At 9:30, Stephen appeared on the street, walking as if he had just bought bread. He wore his shirt open to his chest and a plastic bag with some tangled documents. Seeing the judicial car, he stopped. His eyes changed. He quickened his pace. He went inside without saying hello. He went straight to the living room. What are you doing here? He spat. Stephen, Ramirez said in a dry tone. Today, the total annulment of the fraudulent purchase and sale process is formalized. The house is once again legally protected in the name of Miss Carol Baker. The notary who registered your act was sanctioned and the judge who endorsed it suspended. Stephen clenched his teeth. That can't be. I have the papers forged and they are already in the hands of the district attorney's office. You did this, he yelled at his mother. You and that nosy old woman. Don't raise your voice, Carol said without getting upset. Here, the only one who shouted throughout this story was you. At 10 o'clock, the bailiff opened his folder, read the annulment ruling aloud, and then held out a sheet of paper. This is the final resolution. The sale of the property is completely annulled. The house remains under the guardianship of its legal owner, Ms. Carol Baker. And from this moment on, all unauthorized persons must vacate the property within a period not exceeding 48 hours. Grace came down the stairs just as the bailiff finished speaking. She was carrying a handbag and her lips were tightly pressed. Are you kicking me out too? I'm not kicking you out, Carol said. You left yourself when you hid the food, when you locked the refrigerator. When you spoke to me as if I hadn't carried you for 9 months, did you turn your back on us? No, you turned your backs on me and you pushed me. Stephen shouted again. He tried to snatch the papers but was stopped by one of the officials. If you touch the documents, it is considered judicial obstruction, the bailiff said firmly. Rose from the doorway recorded everything with her cell phone. Do you feel okay? She whispered to Carol. No, but I feel alive. Tony entered after everything. He arrived with his head down, but without running away. I'm sorry, he said, approaching his mother. I couldn't change what they did, but I won't follow them either. Carol looked at him. It's not too late to be different. Can I still stay? Carol took a few seconds. Yes, but no longer as a son, but as a man. Tony lowered his head, not out of shame, out of gratitude. That afternoon, the resolution was delivered to the public registry. Rose's lawyer did the last thing that was needed. He sealed in his own hand that from that moment on, the house was also legally shielded against any future attempt at sale, transfer, loan, or mortgage. And the next day, Carol signed a new document, one that Frank had left her in a sealed envelope, one that she could only open when everything was resolved. It was a second will, a shorter, more recent one, where at the end Frank had written, "And when you are no longer here, let this house remain in the hands of the person who truly cared for you." Not with words, but with actions. And at the bottom of that page there was a single name, Rose Carter. And while Carol signed that sheet from the back of the house, Stephen was making his last call from Frank's old room. A call that would put him in the sights of someone that not even justice would be able to save. Friday, 8 o'clock in the morning. The street was empty. Not a bicycle, not a vendor, not even the tamale cart passed in front of Ms. Carroll's house that morning. The silence was so intense that even footsteps on the sidewalk seemed to reverberate. But inside the house, the tension had another rhythm, a slow one that breathed in Carol's chest like a premonition. Rose had already prepared coffee. Tony was helping move some boxes that were in the hallway, not because Carol was leaving, but because he had decided to stay, not as a tenant or a lost son, but as part of the reconstruction. Today is the meeting, Rose said, serving 2 cups. The bailiff. The notary, the lawyer, the buyer, everyone will be there. And Stephen too, Carol replied, looking out at the street through the curtain slot. Do you think he'll dare? I don't think he'll miss it. But today, Rose, it's not about him. At 10 o'clock, they arrived at the registry office. The office was large with marble floors and a suited receptionist. The signing room had a long wooden table with padded chairs and a hanging lamp in the center. Attorney Ramirez, the public notary, 2 representatives from the state registry, and the legal buyer, an older man named Mr. James Smith, a Phoenix resident who bought properties to convert them into retirement homes, were already there. Upon learning of the conflict, he refused to sign until everything was clean. Miss Carroll, James greeted her with respect. I'm glad to see you standing firm. Today we sign or we don't sign anything. Thank you for not letting yourself be fooled. The house should belong to the one who defended it with her life. Carol sat down, placed her identification, her original will, and the new document that Frank had left in a sealed envelope, the one that confirmed that after her death, the house should pass to a person who had accompanied and cared for her, and that name was already registered, Rose Carter. The bailiff read aloud, "The previous sale is annulled, any attempt at fraudulent transfer is cannelled, and Ms. Carol Baker remains the sole legal owner, and Ms. Rose Carter is the designated heir with ratified legal validity." Carol took the pen and signed in black ink on a sealed sheet with a steady hand. 5 minutes later, the door burst open. Stephen entered. His hair was messy. His jacket was hanging from his arm and his eyes were red. "This is illegal," he shouted, walking toward the table. "You have no right to decide over my family." Attorney Ramirez stood up. "Mr. Stephen, I ask you to remain calm. You no longer have any authority over this property. That house is mine." "No, you wanted to steal it. My father built it for us, and he also wrote that he would not leave it in the hands of those who tried to sell it while his wife was alive. And you not only tried to sell it, you tried to make her disappear." Stephen lunged at the table, but before he could touch a single paper, 2 private security officers stopped him. They escorted him out without hitting him, but firmly. Rose didn't move. She just lowered her gaze. Carol neither, until he turned from the doorway, his face distraught and his voice choked. "You took everything from me, Mom. Everything," Carol replied without shouting. "No, son. You yourself. You let it go." At 11:20, the signature was ratified. The notary sealed the papers. The bailiff signed the closing of the file, and the buyer left with a sincere bow. The process was closed. The house was still Carol's, and its destiny was no longer in the hands of those who didn't know how to value her. But before leaving the office, Rose stopped in front of the lawyer and Grace disappeared. She changed her number. She didn't appear for the summons. She hasn't answered any official notifications. And Stephen, he is under investigation for forgery, document fraud, and identity theft. Carol took a deep breath. Finally, the air entered her chest clean. "Let's go home, Rose. Are you sure?" "Yes. Today. I want to sweep the patio." But what neither of them knew was that while they were returning with their heads held high, someone else was following them at a distance, from a motorcycle with a helmet on and a clear instruction she already signed. "Now take care of the rest." That same afternoon, when they returned from the registry office with the final sealed documents, Miss Carol asked for something simple. "I want to sit outside in front of the lemon tree." Rose placed an old wooden bench in the shade, the same one Frank had made with his own hands. Carol walked slowly in her flat sandals and her linen dress. The sun touched her face gently. Her eyes, although marked by the years, shone with a peace that hadn't been seen in a long time. "I never thought this day would come," Carol said, looking at the green branches of the tree. "But it did," Rose replied. "And no one can take it away from you." Tony came out with the tray, 2 glasses of iced water, and some cookies he had gone to buy with his own savings. He sat next to his mother in silence, like a child who understands that no words can heal, but presence can reconcile. "Thank you for not letting go of me," he said. "You never left completely, son." The house was calm. For the first time in years, Stephen and Grace were forced to vacate the property under judicial custody. The sale was completely annulled. The corrupt judge was dismissed, and the fake real estate company was closed for fraud. Neither of them knocked on the door again. Days later, Carol called a locksmith, changed the locks, but not to close the house to others, but to open it to a new stage. "This house is not big," she told Rose, "but it has more history than square footage, and you are no longer carrying it alone." Carol decided to write a letter. She left it inside the Bible next to Frank's portrait. "To whoever reads this house was made with sweat, but more than bricks, it was built with love. I didn't win a war. I just recovered what I should never have lost. And if fear ever knocks on your door, don't let it find you silent, because there are battles that are won without raising your voice, with dignity, with memory, with truth." And so, sitting under the lemon tree, Carol looked up. "You know, Frank, you didn't give me gold, but you gave me your word, and that saved me." Rose sat down next to her. "Do you want me to put on some music?" "No, just stay, just like this quietly. And if you who are listening to this story made it this far, I invite you to stay a little longer, because if this story touched your heart, help us continue telling many more. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, Hit the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming. And if you want to directly support this project and keep this space of stories alive, you can leave a super thanks below. Everything counts. Everything helps. And since you made it to the end, write the word dignity in the comments so I know that you also stayed until the very last silence. Thank you for joining me. See you in the next